All right, this week, so we read about the Metzora, which is commonly translated as leprosy. The truth is, as it seems from many of the commentaries, it's something different than leprosy. But I guess the closest thing that they had to Tzaraas was leprosy. So it was commonly translated as Tzaraas. And our sages say, and discusses the halachas, the laws of Tzaraas. Those who are afflicted with a certain skin situation, areas turn colors white. It's discussed at length what the forms of how Tzaraas manifests itself. And there are those who see Tzaraas and how the person who is declared as a Metzora by the Kohen, the Kohen would come to view the person, or actually the person would go to the Kohen to see to take a look at the signs of Tzaraas that were on his body, and the Kohen would determine whether the Tzaraas manifests itself in a manner that the laws of Tumah, the laws of contamination. When I speak of contamination, in other words, a Metzora was not allowed to dwell while he was still considered contaminated to Tzaraas in the cities. In many of the cities, he had to sit b'chutz lamachne. He had to sit outside the walls. The Haftorah actually is Arba Metzorayim, about the four Metzorayim. It's Geichas Yuvanav, and they were isolated. They had to wear a cover over their face. There were all kinds of halachas that applied to someone who had Tzaraas. According to our sages, Tzaraas was associated with Lashon Hara, actually with a number of other Averis as well, but mainly with Lashon Hara, with talking gossip or evil talk about somebody. And there are many that suggest that this person tried to separate one person from his friend, to separate, to cause friction, and to ultimately separate one spouse from the other spouse. And because of that, he was afflicted with Tzaraas, which required him to be separated from people. Now, in a sense, I guess, in other words, person has to be sensitive to the pain he caused others. We do not become sensitive to the pains of others unless we are able to feel that pain itself. At times I have explained this, and the idea that when the Jewish people accepted the Torah, they became like one person. What does it mean? It's as identified. I have identified it with the you have to love your friend as yourself. When you have pain, you feel the pain. When you have joy, you feel the joy. So you should have the same attitude to a certain degree about your friend also. When he has pain, it's not enough that that you have sympathy for him, but you have to have empathy. You have to be able to feel the pain. And sometimes even more difficult than that is feeling and sharing his joy. So we can understand that the requirement of separation is based on the fact that sometimes a person wasn't sensitive or wasn't even aware of the consequences of his actions, because the consequences of those actions did not have an impact on him. He wouldn't suffer from the pain that he caused his friend to have. And because he didn't suffer from the pain, he wasn't even sensitive to the fact or to the degree of the pain that his friend had. He dismissed it as nothing. But there are some commentaries, and it represents almost, it's presented according to most of the Mefarshim as something supernatural, not an illness. However, there are those who see the Tzaraas as a form of illness. And when they speak of, when the Torah speaks, how the person who had Tzaraas had to be separated, he sometimes put outside the walls of the city until he became tar, until the situation changed. So the person, those who see it as a natural thing, in a sense, it was because there was a fear that Tzaraas is going to spread. And the Tzaraas, like any disease, we just went through 2 years of a lockdown without getting into the details as to whether it was necessary or it was not necessary, or to the degree that it was necessary or not necessary. But there is a fear when we deal with disease, that disease will spread from person to person. And therefore it becomes necessary to separate people who have the disease from people who don't have the disease. And I think that, and the Ralbag, I think, he focuses it on as a disease. Other Mefarshim also focus it on it being a disease and the separation being necessary to prevent the spread of that disease. Whereas other commentaries, and by the way, not just earlier commentaries, but later commentaries also, they see it as something supernatural, not a regular disease. We might call it leprosy. And to a certain degree, it was supernatural, you have to say, because the Torah speaks about the Tzaraas, if you want to call it the leprosy, being on the walls of the house sometimes being on the clothes that man wears, and of course, being on the person himself. Now, it's interesting, if you take a look at the Rambam in Moreh Nevuchim, the Rambam seems to accept both opinions. On one hand, the Rambam sees Tzaraas as a disease and as the separation, almost as a medical necessity, to separate the spread of the disease. But on the other hand, the Rambam mentions the explanation of our sages that it was like a punishment for lashon hara, for evil talk. And he even says, and then he adds, that first the Tzaraas would affect the person's house. The so-called leprosy would be on the walls of the house. And then after that, the leprosy, following the explanation of Chazal, of our sages, the leprosy would affect the clothes of the person. The clothes would have marks of leprosy on them. And after that, if the person persisted in his sin, the leprosy would affect him. It seems, according to the Rambam, that we start off with the most supernatural, because leprosy on the house is something that perhaps is as totally unscientific as could be. Clothes, I don't think can have leprosy either scientifically, but sometimes clothes do medically become contaminated by virtue of the disease of a person wears. Here it was more than that. And then the leprosy affects the person. Now, what's interesting is that if you take a look, if one takes a look at the Torah places it in the reverse order. The Torah talks first about the leprosy that affects the person, then about the leprosy that affects the clothes, and then about the leprosy that affects the house. So the question is, why should the Torah place it in a different order than it actually took place? And also we have to understand, how does the Rambam, on one hand, understand leprosy from the perspective of being a natural disease, and the separation being to prevent the spread of the disease, and the other hand, seeing it as a punishment, as a punishment that requires banishment because of the attitude that one person had about the other. Now, there is a very famous medrash, and I looked in looking through some of the Mefarshim on the Medrash Rabbi, and it seems clear that there was different texts, or they understood that some of the psukim quoted in the Medrash Rabbi were not mentioned completely. And the story tells us, the Medrash tells us, that it was in the Tzipora area. Rav Yanai was sitting there and learning, and a peddler, Rachel, came and he asked, who wants Samachayim? I guess the best way to explain it as the medicine of life, some kind of cure that will prolong somebody's life. And a big crowd, this peddler when he made his announcement. So crowds gathered around him. You can imagine today, if somebody would offer the medicines of life, of extending life, I assume everybody but the doctors would come and surround him. That's only some of the doctors. So large crowds gathered around him. And Rav Yana himself, Rav Yana wanted long life. After all, the Torah says, of course, the Torah means something in addition to that, and it's perhaps the peddler also meant something in addition. It says, "Ubacharta b'chayim." We have to give special emphasis. The Torah wants us to choose life. So Rav Yana, like the crowds that was before him, also approached the peddler, offering to acquire and to buy this medicine of life. And the peddler turned to Rav Yana, and the peddler said to Rav Yana, "This is for you and those that are like you," meaning the Chachamim, the sages, who are involved in the learning of Torah. You don't need it. But Rav Yana persisted. And Rav Yana wanted the medicine of life. So the peddler took a Tehillim. In Perek Lamed Dalet of Tehillim, and he said, it says there, Mi ha'ish hachafetz chayim. Who is the person who wants life? Ohev yomim, who loves days. Liros tov, to see good. Metzora l'shon chameira, stop your tongue from bad, from talking bad. Usvasecha medaber mirma, and your lips from saying fraud. Sur meira, leave bad. Vasei tov, and do good. Bakei shalom v'radfehu. Search out peace and run after it. And Rav Yana said, he was very appreciative of this. And Rav Yana said, this is actually what Shlomo HaMelech said, that the one who watches over his mouth, and Mishlei, one who watches over his mouth, guards himself from bad of the soul, from bad to the soul. And then Rav Yana said, and everybody is taken aback, all the commentaries. He said, all my life, I read these psukim. And all my life, I didn't understand it. Until I met this peddler who showed me these psukim. Then he adds, Zos Torahs HaMetzora. What it says in this week's Sedra, this is the Torah of the Metzora. of the one who is afflicted with Tzaraas, the one who has the so-called leprosy. Ha-Metzora motzi ra. Simple. He says the word Metzora is one who talks evil. And the question is, Rav Yanai seemed to say that the two ways of understanding it, but some way many of the commentaries understood it. And it seems to be the Pashut reading of the simple reading of the Medrash, that he had some doubts as to the meaning of this pasuk before he met the peddler. But from the peddler, he got an insight, a perspective, that the doubts as to what the explanation was removed. It was answered. And the question is, how else? What were the questions that Rabbi Yanai had before he met the peddler? How else could you understand the simple meaning of the pasuk? What was the new insight? What did the peddler convey? What did the peddler convey to Rabbi Yanai that he didn't know before? The pasuk, as Rabbi Yanai himself said, he read that pasuk many times. Who is the man, or what is the man who desires life, who loves days? Liros tov, to see good. Nitzol shon chameira, hold back your tongue from bad, and your lips from saying fraud. Sur meirah, turn away from bad. V'asei tov, and do good. Bakei shon v'radfehu. What insight? This is what the peddler said. The peddler did add. Nitzol shoncha is mentioned in the pasuk immediately after Miha Ish HaChafetz Chaim. Okay. When Rabbi Yanai looked at the hill, he saw that also. So what is it? What is it that was revealed to Rabbi Yanai by the peddler? Now, years ago, and at that time, I didn't fully comprehend, because I hadn't looked over the Medrash Rabbi inside, what my father meant. But it was at a simcha of a close friend of mine who was a Talmud, a devoted Talmud of my father. And the Kiddush was in honor of his engagement, of his becoming a chassan. And because my father was the Rabbi of the chassan, so they asked my father to speak at the shul. And my father asked this question, and the question did not originate with my father. All the Mefarshim on the Medrash Rabbi give that same answer. My father at that time said, what Rabbi Yanai saw was that a person, it's not enough to know that watching your speech, being careful about your speech, is necessary for a long life. And matter of fact, as some of the commentaries point out, the pasuk could be interpreted as dealing not only about watching your speech, although it certainly emphasizes that, but in terms of the whole Torah, sur meirah, turn away from evil, v'asei tov, and do good. Bakei shalom v'radfehu, search the peace or search out the peace and run after it. So my father said, the insight he got is the Torah is from the peddler, that it's not enough to believe it. It's not even enough to follow it. But you have to be a Rachel. You have to be a peddler. What my father said, I think, was saying, because it was a short speech, so he wasn't able to explain him. So he was talking about the chassan, that the chassan was involved in being mekaret people. He had an influence on people. So in order to preserve long life, to have long life, it's not enough that you try to watch yourself. You have to be a peddler for it. Now, my father didn't say this, but I think that that's what my father meant. I think what my father meant, and no, it's one of the problems is if the reward for watching how you talk and how you act is a long life. If that's what the pasuk is telling us, so it's why did it have to say mi ha'esh ha'chafetz chaim? Why do you have to call people? Who is the one that wants life? Come to me. Why do you have to say that? You should say ha'chafetz chaim. If somebody wants life, or one who watches his tongue, will have long life. But why does it have to be in the form of a proclamation, in a question form, like you're calling people to you? But the answer is that, and to a certain degree, that's the midah of Avraham Avinu. That full devotion manifests itself. Not when you try to observe it, not when you try to observe it yourself. But of course you have to observe it yourself. But you have to try to influence others as well. And the influence that you have on others, to a large degree, also has an impact on yourself. At that time, the chassan was involved, as I mentioned, in Kiruv. My father said to be a peddler of Torah. And it's very interesting. I don't think my father mentioned it. It was so many years ago. I don't remember exactly. Torah, when it talks about Lashon Hara, it uses the word Rachel. That you shouldn't be a peddler of Lashon Hara. There are peddlers of Lashon Hara, and there are peddlers of Torah. There are people that try to ruin people's reputation. And there are people who try to bring people closer to Torah. And the truth of the matter is, when it comes to Kiruv, a person to a certain degree, of course, you have to always be on guard. But you have to recognize, my father didn't mention this at that time, you have to recognize that even one who was a Rachel, but if you are a true peddler of Torah, you could somehow have an influence on the person to change his ways. And that's how my father explained it. And in the sense that he was explaining, the question is, why did the pasuk say, mi ha'ish, like a peddler, come to me? Because it's not enough to believe it. It's not enough to say, I'm going to do it, but you have to be a peddler over that point. You have to give it over to others. And I think, when you take a look at the Medrash emphasizes another point. And the point was that when the peddler made his announcement, many people ran to him. Why was that significant regarding the discussion of Rabbi Yanai? And when Rabbi Yanai saw the many people that were running to him, he also ran to the peddler and begged the peddler, pressured the peddler to sell him the Sam HaChayim, the medicine of life. And I think, and also we have to understand, why did initially the peddler say, this is not for you and those like you, meaning not for the Talmidei Chachamim, not for the people who are involved in Torah study. You don't need it. That's not for you. You don't need it. But Rabbi Yanai persisted. And apparently, the Medrash is probably trying to tell us that even though the peddler thought that he didn't need it, Rabbi Yanai also needed it. What is the idea behind it? And I think that perhaps the idea behind it is we read all the time in the Torah about reward and punishment. And when we're told that there's disease, when we're told about possible epidemics, we're very careful. Perhaps there's a symbolism in placing the masks over our mouths. A lot of the people apparently, from a scientific point, it didn't help much, but placed the masks only over their mouths, not over their noses. But perhaps there's a symbolism in the placing of the masks over the mouth. It's a little harder to talk, a little harder to breathe also, but a little harder to talk when you have the masks over your mouth. But when it comes to physical ailments, at least initially, people get very careful. And if there's a special medicine, people take the medicine. They run for it. But when we read the Torah and we see about reward and punishment for the mitzvos, we don't think it has a direct effect. Disease and preventage of disease and cure. Kol hamachla asher samti al Mitzrayim lo osim alecha, preventive medicine. Somehow, this spiritual medicine doesn't have that same impact on us. If somebody comes and says, if you do these and these averos, you'll be punished, you don't find crowds running to buy it. And I think what the Rachel, the peddler, was saying, that see this, the disease of Lashon Hara. Lashon Hara is an effect that brings a disease. Now, how can we understand it? Now, I've talked in the past very often, based on the explanation of the Palgei Mayim, that very often what happens, that when a person sins, HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't punish him directly, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu removes to a certain degree his shmira over that person. Where there are times when HaKadosh Baruch Hu is a Shomer Yisrael. The Shomer isn't just the person who looks. A Shomer, a watchman, has responsibilities. He has to be a protector. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is a Shomer Yisrael. There are times when HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to a certain degree, withdraws to a small degree. And nature takes its own course. And diseases that are raging throughout the world could sometimes affect a person. Whereas under other circumstances, HaKadosh Baruch Hu would have protected the person from the forces of nature. So we could say that actually Tzaraas is a physical ailment. I don't know. There are a lot of physical ailments that are not prevalent today. But how we can understand it? It's Reb Chaim actually has to do with last week's Sedra. In last week's Sedra, we're told about the laws of kashrus. What animals are kosher and what animals are not kosher. What birds are kosher, what birds are not kosher. What fish is kosher, what fish is not kosher. And the Rambam, in explaining the laws of kashrus in the Moreh Nevuchim, he attributes the laws of kashrus to health situations. In other words, seemingly the Rambam felt that many laws of kashrus are conducive to good health. Of course, everything depends how much you eat. And if you don't observe the laws of kashrus, so it's conducive to sickness, to an unhealthy perspective of life. And the Rabbi, who was certainly a rationalist, in fact, it's beyond imagination, but some things that are beyond imagination today, if we couldn't realize that it happens, we would lose contact with reality. And many yeshivas, they discourage people from looking into the Abarbanel. They discourage people from looking into the Ibn Ezra. The Rambam, in his letter to his son, told him that he should learn the Ibn Ezra and Chumash. Whatever it is, but even the Abarbanel, the rationalist, the Abarbanel, attacks the Rambam for this suggestion. Now, Reb Chaim had a very interesting approach. And Reb Chaim said, he mentioned the Zohar, wasn't suggesting that the Rambam had the Zohar or the Rambam learned the Zohar. It's known that the Zohar was, how should I put it? The Zohar was was starting to be in use around the time of the Ramban, which was about probably 100 years after the Ramban. Anyway, the Zohar says, but the same thought you could see from Midrashim as well, that by the time of Brias Olam, at the time of the creation of the world, is Stakel b'taraso bara lamo. God looked at his Torah and created the world. In other words, the Torah is the blueprint for the creation of the world. In Kabbalah, they talk about the osios of the Torah. The letters of the Torah were used for the formation of the world. What's the idea? Reb Chaim said, yes, the Rambam is correct, that very often, as a result of the observance of the Torah, man is protected from a health perspective, or the Jew is protected. And every once in a while, we hear of a new thought, a new situation, a new example. And then sometimes somebody will write a paper saying that it is not an example. They used to say that the vitamin K that is needed for the blood in dealing with wounds is that at its highest level on the 8th day of birth from a child. So it's just the reverse. It's not that the mitzvos of the Torah were given to accommodate the situation of the world. It's the reverse. The world was created in a way to accommodate the mitzvos of the Torah. That's what Reb Chaim said. And we could suggest that the idea is that in the natural form of things, when God doesn't protect us, when God doesn't intervene, then we could suffer from the effects of what is transpiring in the world. Diseases that under other circumstances, God would have protected us. When there is a form of hest upon him, or a minor form of hest upon him, God he looks from the windows, he observes, he keeps track, but he doesn't always intervene. And specifically when it comes to Lashon Hara. So the world was created with diseases that perhaps today is rare, or perhaps for some reason might not even exist, or exists in very few cases, might not even be recorded. Maybe these diseases will happen because of experimentations in laboratories. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't intervene. He might not intervene in China. He might not intervene in the United States. And he might not intervene sometimes, chas v'shalom, in Israel. And today, diseases spread all over the world. And perhaps there's a lesson here also. The lesson is the influence, the impact that the world has upon us. So it's possible you could see the Tzaraas, whatever disease it is, as a natural phenomenon, at least when it strikes man. When it strikes man, it might be a natural phenomenon. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu protects us. And in certain cases, not necessarily in all the cases, that Tzaraas that we got because the hashgacha removed itself somewhat because of the way we acted. The halachas of Tumah took effect. It could be the laws of Tumah do not always take effect when there's Tzaraas. There are Tzaraas that is tar, but it doesn't mean it's not a punishment. If someone has Tzaraas over his whole body, so he's not tamei. But it's Tzaraas nevertheless. He has the physical ailment. HaKadosh Baruch Hu didn't intervene. So I think that there is no contradiction in the Rambam. In other words, it might be a natural disease. And it could be that separation is important. But how it manifests itself varies from situation to situation, because to a large degree, it's based on the partial withdrawal of HaKadosh Baruch Hu from his involvement in that situation. And now this is, so I think this is what the Rachel was saying. The Rachel was saying, he was also troubled. Why does the Navi, why does the Tehillim put it in the forms of the type of announcement that a Rachel makes? He puts it in that form because if a Rachel comes and he sells medicine, and we know how effective those medicines that the Rachel used to sell were, the crowds jump. They'll pay large amounts of money for it. But when you read in the Torah, the message of HaKadosh Baruch Hu of what will happen, then we don't run. There are no big crowds. So miha'ish, we have to view it as a physical ailment, to recognize that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to a certain degree, removes himself from the situation, and the physical ailment comes and affects us. We have to have a medical approach combined with our spiritual approach to comprehend the lesson that the Rachel was saying. And I think to a certain degree, we could take it a step further. Now, while the disease on a human being, the Tzaraas in a human being could be seen as a disease on the house, on the clothes. How are we to understand that? So, interestingly, we start off with the most supernatural thing. according to the Rambam. And from Chazal appears that way also. That first it strikes the house, and then it strikes the clothes, and then it strikes the person. But the Torah first talks about it striking the person, then striking the clothes, and then striking the house, in the opposite order that it happens. Why is it? Apparently, the Torah introduces Tzaraas to us on the person, because on the person we can understand it as a disease. If the Torah introduced Tzaraas to us as something that happened on the house, we wouldn't see it as a disease. Why is it that the Torah wanted us to view it as a disease? Well, one reason I just mentioned. Because people, when it comes to disease and comes to medicine, people are motivated. But when it comes to punishment, it won't happen to me. That's the attitude. No one says, well, I shouldn't say no one, but people are less likely to say it when it comes to a disease. So I think the pshat is because the Torah wanted us to view, even though when it's on the house and on the clothes, it's supernatural. It can't, and logically, it couldn't even be viewed as a disease. The Torah introduced it to us on a person in order that we should see it as a disease, even on the house and even on the clothes. Why? The answer is we have to look at the fundamentals. What causes Lashon Hara? Now, we don't have much time, so I'll just start. Sometimes Lashon Hara is caused when we look at other people and we look at ourselves and we compare ourselves to other people. Sometimes it's because of our haughtiness. We think we made it financially. We have a house. We have good clothes. You know, it's very interesting. More and more, you're beginning to notice that shuls, I have to say that my shul is an exception, thank God, to this rule. But different shuls, it's people that seem to hang out together in the same businesses. They see themselves as a separate group. And sometimes there's a sense of haughtiness. We own real estate. We have lots of money. And who are you? You are a nothing. So they evaluate people not on who they are, but they see who they are on the basis of the clothes that they wear and the possessions that they have. In a sense, when they look at a person, they're looking at his clothes. The clothes, their attitude is that the clothes is part and parcel of the person. It's not something that's just on the person. The possessions that he has, that's part and parcel of him. Disease affects the person. And when you begin to see people and you evaluate people, you consider who they are on the basis of the clothes that they have, on the basis of the possessions they have, on the basis of the houses that they build for themselves. So you don't see man as he was created by God. You see man as he was created by you. You think you created yourself. The house is part of you. The clothes are part of you. Clothes make a person, is what they say. With them, it's even more. Clothes is the person. In fact, they are primarily the house and the clothes. Who they really are is the least important thing in their minds. So, because you see the possessions of the person as part of him, so Mida Keneged Mida, the Torah tells us, the clothes get affected, the house gets affected with diseases that are usually identified with man. And the same thing is true in the reverse. When people see how other people are successful, so they get to have a very bad perception of themselves. And instead of seeing the good qualities that they have, and usually before they get so overtaken by the sense of jealousy, many of the poor people do have a lot of good qualities. So they focus on the bad of the other person. They're Metzora. Zos Torah Metzora Metzora. He says evil, but more than says evil, he finds evil. He looks for the bad in the person. Instead of trying to work on the good in himself, he works on the bad of the other person. He's Metzora. He finds bad in the other person, and he's Metzora, and he talks about the Ra. This is the Torah Metzora. So the idea of Tzaraas, the idea of Tzaraas is that we have to understand, we have to have the same attitude that we have in regard to Tzaraas, that we have in regard to health, in regard to medicine that will prolong our lives. We have to have it that same regard in regard to the spiritual medicine that will prolong our lives. And it's very interesting that when it says, when the Torah said, when the in Tehillim we say the Ohev Yomim Liros Tov. So Liros Tov can be understood in many different ways. He loves days. In other words, I mentioned many times, Ba'avram Zakein Ba'bayomim, there are people who are elderly that are old in years, but they don't focus on the individual days of those years. So he says, Mihayish Chafetz Chaim, Ohev Yomim, to love the days of the long years also. Liros Tov. Liros Tov means to see good, not to search out evil. Liros Tov means that it should be good for you. But more than that, Liros Tov, Ohev Yomim, Liros Tov. It's like the Torah tells us by Kansipor and Parshas Kiseitze, Shalach Tishalech Esa'ein V'Asabanu Tikach Lach L'man Yitab Lach V'Harach V'Yomin. And what is that? Mitzvah Gereris Mitzvah. When you act properly, you do a mitzvah. So as Rashi explains, HaKadosh Baruch Hu rewards you with a mundane reward that offers you the opportunity to do more mitzvahs. We could perhaps suggest that Mihayish Chafetz Chaim Ohev Yomim. He loves the days of these years. Liros Tov. Liras Tov, in order to see the good in everybody. Liros Tov, in order that he should have good life. Because you can have Yamim and you don't have good. But Liros Tov could also mean to see opportunities that will make your life good. Opportunities, yes, rewards, mundane rewards. But those mundane rewards should be mitzvah, gereris mitzvah. They should offer the opportunity to go from one point to another. Be careful what you say. Then, as a result of that, that will help you. You will develop in going away from evil, and you will do positive things, mitzvah and everything. You will grow spiritually. And that will cost you bake shalom v'radfehu. And then you will search for peace for yourself, peace between you and others, and radfehu, and run after it. But as my grandfather would say, bake shalom is not just to search for peace, but search out the peace. Search out the peace for radfehu, and then run after it. Make sure it's a true peace. Unfortunately, the gossipers and all that sometimes comes because of the group that we are at peace with, although usually that crumbles also. But make sure it's a true peace. Search out who you associate with, and then radfehu, and then seek out their friendship, create relationships. And this is the idea of Mihaish HaChafetz Chaim, Oiv Yamin Liros Tov, Mitzvah L'shon Chameras V'Secha Nedam Virma, Sur Meira B'Asei Tov, B'Kei Shal T'Radfehu.
If anyone has any questions, please put them in the chat. One question is, if Jews get diseases because Hashem removes his protection from disease, how does that apply that the non-Jews get the same diseases?
First of all, it could be HaKadosh Baruch Hu does the same thing with non-Jews. I would suggest that perhaps HaKadosh Baruch Hu, when we act properly, gives us, on the contrary, perhaps give us additional protection.
How can we deal with those who seek to peddle bad about us and others, knowing that we can't change them or sway them?
I think that would vary from situation to situation, but you have to know, a person is certainly allowed to defend himself. There is a midas chassidus sometimes of not striking back, although a person sometimes could strike back, but you have to evaluate each situation differently. And it's interesting, the Torah tells us that when you go, that you should go to a Kohen. And perhaps there is a lesson to that sometimes deciding of how to act and how not to act was that we didn't go to people who were religiously close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu to seek out their advice. To get it's sort of a lesson that ein chavish matir atzmo beis hasurim. Person always needs the help of others, and especially when we deal with spiritual matters, a person has to seek out help, discuss it with somebody.
Okay, can you please explain again why there's an emphasis in Rabbi Yanai?
Rabbi Yanai himself? I don't understand. What do you mean? What's the question? No, it's Rabbi Yanai said after because of the way the peddler presented it. Instead of saying, if you watch your tongue, you'll live long. But the pasuk presents it the way a peddler would present it. So the pasuk presents it the way a peddler presents it. Now, when a peddler comes and offers medicine, when you view it as a physical ailment, people run to a peddler. But when someone comes to speak about correcting our ways, we don't run to him. So we have to see it. We have to view the person who's coming to offer us guidance in the same way somebody who's coming to offer us medicine. That's the way I explained it. My father explained it that we have to, it's not enough for us to focus on ourselves. We have to focus on others also following through. You know, it's interesting. There were fellas in yeshiva years ago who were somewhat, how should we put it, not exactly doing everything that they should do, and probably doing some things that they shouldn't do. And for whatever reason, they became rabbis. In the old days, they became rabbis. And it's interesting. As soon as they became rabbis, they were trying to influence others to come to shul, to daven, to this, that had an impact on them also. So that's first of all. And secondly, when there's devotion to a mitzvah, the devotion to a mitzvah doesn't only manifest itself in what you do for yourself, but the devotion to a mitzvah is in getting other people to observe the mitzvah. Avas Hashem is not enough to love God, but to make God beloved to others. And then there's a third thing. The third thing is that when we show concern that others act properly, it's a demonstration of the ava, of the love that we have for the other people.
Okay, thank you. There aren't any more questions. Everyone have a good week, and Amir Tashem will see you next Sunday.